In the darkness of your screen, another nightmare awaits. Welcome to Void of Fears. We've conquered 10k, but the shadows grow hungry for more. Our journey to 100k subscribers has begun. Every like feeds the algorithm. Every comment summons new victims. Every subscription strengthens what we're building here. Join us. Shape our future. The Void has room for all. Now, let's dive into tonight's story. The apartment smelled of dust and desperation. Commander Paul Garrett's trembling hands adjusted the ancient recording device as he leaned forward, his weathered face caught in the harsh glow of a desk lamp. At 78, time had not been kind to him. Deep lines etched into his face like Martian valleys, eyes sunken and haunted. "Is it recording?" he asked, voice raspy from decades of silence. Maya Chen nodded, adjusting her notepad. "Yes, Commander, take your time." The walls around them told a story of obsession. Mars photographs arranged in intricate patterns, newspaper clippings about missing scientists spanning decades, and strange markings etched directly into the plaster, topographical features of the Martian surface rendered with disturbing precision. Through the threadbare curtains, the setting sun cast long shadows across the sparse furniture. A military pension had kept Paul alive, but little more. His life reduced to this single-room apartment on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona, where the night sky still revealed Mars as a bright red dot when conditions were right. "They're watching," Paul muttered, yanking the curtains closed. "Always watching." He scratched absently at his forearm, where a faded scar resembled burned tissue. "Nobody believed me. Why should you?" "Because you have evidence," Maya replied, her journalistic instincts firing. 46 years of silence is a long time, Commander. She had come prepared for disappointment, another conspiracy theorist, another dead end. But something about the old astronaut's demeanor spoke of genuine trauma rather than delusion. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen things human minds weren't meant to process. Paul crossed to an unremarkable section of wall and pressed against it, revealing a hidden safe. Inside, mission patches with an unfamiliar insignia, data drives sealed in military-grade containers, and a small jar of rusty Martian soil. "What NASA told you about the first Mars landing was a lie," he said, his voice suddenly stronger. "We were there in 79 and something followed us back." He set the jar on the table between them with the care one might give a live explosive. Something still here. The soil inside the jar seemed ordinary, reddish-brown, fine-grained. But under the lamp's direct light, Maya noticed something peculiar. Tiny movements like currents in a liquid, though the material was clearly solid. "Why now?" Maya asked, fighting the urge to reach for the jar. "Why break your silence after all these years?" Paul's eyes met hers, clear with terrible purpose. "Because they're planning to go back. And it's still waiting." He pulled a worn folder from the safe, medical reports, brain scans, blood work, all bearing government classification stamps that hadn't been used in decades. "I'm dying," he explained, laying out the documents. "Brain cancer. The doctors called it unprecedented. Tumors forming patterns they've never seen before." His finger traced a scan showing abnormal growth throughout his cerebral cortex. "It's not just killing me, it's using me, reorganizing me, and I think it's finally ready." Maya's recorder captured his ragged breathing, the distant sound of traffic, the soft tap of his finger against his temple. "Start at the beginning," she said gently. "Tell me everything." Paul Garrett closed his eyes, gathering 46 years of buried memories. January 1979. That's when they selected us. The crew no one would ever know about. The fluorescent lights of Houston Space Center's sub-basement conference room cast everyone in a sickly pallor as 5 astronauts filed in. January 1979. Armed guards stood at attention by the doors. Not NASA security, but military personnel with expressionless faces. Paul recognized the insignia on their uniforms as belonging to a special division rumored to handle extraterrestrial matters, the kind of unit whose existence was officially denied. His fellow astronauts noticed too, exchanging subtle glances as they took their seats around the polished table. NASA Director Harmon waited until the heavy doors sealed shut before speaking. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Officially, none of you are being assigned to a Mars mission." He activated a projector. "Officially, you'll be monitoring weather satellites. Unofficially." The image showed a section of Martian surface near Olympus Mons. At first glance, nothing remarkable, just another desolate Martian landscape. Then, Harmon enhanced the section, revealing an anomalous formation partially buried beneath the dust. 13 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected this signal. He played an audio file, rhythmic pulses with complex variations. It bears no resemblance to any known communication pattern, natural or artificial. It's coming from this exact location. The room temperature seemed to drop as the implication sank in. Paul felt goosebumps rise on his arms as the sound played, something in its cadence triggering an instinctive discomfort. "We've been intercepting it ever since," Harmon continued, his expression grim. "Initially, we thought it might be a natural phenomenon, but the pattern shows clear signs of intelligence. It's a beacon, or a warning." "Has it been decoded?" Dr. Elise Ward asked, her expertise in communications making her the natural one to raise the question. "Partially," Harmon admitted. "There are elements that resist conventional analysis. It repeats on a 72-hour cycle, with subtle variations each time. Some aspects suggest it's adaptive, evolving in response to our attempts to understand it." Commander Paul Garrett studied the other faces around the table. Dr. Iris Leclerc, the French exobiologist whose papers on theoretical alien biology had quietly disappeared from academic circulation. Captain Julio Morales, whose test pilot skills had broken every simulator record. Lieutenant Sven Orlov, the Russian defector whose engineering brilliance was matched only by his proficiency with weapons. And Dr. Elise Ward, communications specialist with an uncanny gift for pattern recognition. None of them were ordinary astronauts. All had specialized training beyond what NASA publicly acknowledged. Paul noticed how Iris stared at the Martian imagery with barely contained excitement, how Sven's eyes narrowed with suspicion, how Julio's fingers drummed a rhythm against his thigh that unconsciously matched the signal's pattern. "Your mission, designated Ares 1, will launch in 6 weeks, Harmon continued. "You'll be using propulsion technology that remains classified. The journey will take 6 months, instead of the projected 9. Upon return, all mission documentation will be destroyed." "And our families?" Elise asked. "They'll be told you're monitoring weather satellites from orbit, nothing more." Sven leaned forward, Russian accent thickening, as it always did when he was concerned. "What if signal is trap? What if whatever waits on Mars is hostile?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortably direct. "That's why this isn't just a scientific mission," Harmon replied after a pause. "You've been selected for your specific capabilities, including emergency protocols." The term was a euphemism they all understood. Each had been trained in worst-case scenarios that extended beyond equipment failures or oxygen depletion. Paul raised his hand. "Sir, if we find what you're expecting us to find, what then?" Harmon's expression hardened. "That's why we selected this team, Commander Garrett. You'll do what needs to be done." After the briefing, the 5 astronauts were escorted directly to a waiting transport. No opportunity to contact family, no chance to settle personal affairs. The mission had already begun. "Well," Julio said as they boarded the unmarked plane, "always wanted to make history. Guess I'll have to settle for making classified history instead." None of them laughed. They all recognized the weight settling onto their shoulders. They might become the most important explorers in human history, and no one would ever know their names. The training facility in Nevada's desert housed the 5 of them in isolation. Their days filled with simulations, their nights with preparation for contingencies never before considered in space travel. The facility itself was unlike anything in NASA's public operations. A sprawling underground complex with technology that seemed decades ahead of what should have been available in 1979. The Ares module they would pilot to Mars incorporated systems that Paul had never seen before, raising questions about whether all advances in propulsion had truly been shared with the space program. Paul found Iris alone in the lab one evening, studying bacterial samples. "You should sleep," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look up from her microscope. "Did you know NASA found anomalous organic compounds in the Viking samples? It wasn't in the public report." Paul stepped closer, intrigued despite his concern for her rest. "How do you know that?" "I have colleagues who processed the original samples," she replied, finally meeting his gaze, "before they were reassigned to classified projects and stopped returning calls. Is that what you believe we'll find? Life?" Her eyes brightened with conviction. "Not just life, Paul. I think we'll find evidence of civilization. Ancient perhaps, but intelligent." She slid a folder across the table. "These are my private analyses of the signal patterns. They contain information, organized, deliberate information." Paul examined her notes, impressed by the depth of her analysis, but troubled by her conclusions. The patterns she'd identified suggested not just intelligence, but something systematic, almost like programming code. "You think it's instructions?" he asked, uneasy. Iris hesitated. "I think it's preparing us, preparing whoever receives it for contact." She bit her lip. "But I'm not sure it was intended for humans originally." The implications hung between them in the sterile lab air. If the signal wasn't meant for humans, who or what was its intended recipient? In the mess hall, Sven and Julio argued over chess. The clatter of plastic pieces on the board punctuated their conversation, providing rhythm to tensions that had been building throughout training. "This mission feels wrong," Sven muttered, his accent thickening with emotion. "In Russia, when government tells special team to investigate signal without telling public, it never ends with vodka and celebration." Julio captured Sven's bishop. "You defected for a reason, my friend. Besides, making history isn't supposed to feel comfortable." "We won't be making history," Sven replied, eyes dark. "No one will ever know what we find." "You could have declined the assignment," Julio pointed out. Sven laughed, without humor. "Could I? You think anyone who knows about Mars signal ever disappears quietly into civilian life?" He moved his knight aggressively. "We were chosen because we are expendable. No families asking difficult questions if we never come back." The observation struck uncomfortably close to truth. All 5 crew members were similar in that respect. Minimal attachments, few close relationships. Paul had been divorced for 3 years. Iris had no living relatives. Julio's family believed he had died in a classified aircraft test years earlier, part of his cover when he began working on experimental craft. Sven had left everything behind when he defected, and Elise. In the communications bay, Elise ran diagnostics on their systems when the first anomaly occurred. Static burst through her headphones, then resolved into what sounded like distant whispers. She yanked off the headset, heart racing. "System malfunction?" Paul asked, noticing her distress when he entered for his scheduled communications training. "Yes," she lied, something instinctive, warning her not to mention the whispers that had sounded almost like her name. "Just equipment feedback." Later that night, she returned alone to the communications bay, driven by professional curiosity and unnerving suspicion. She recalibrated the receivers, adjusting them to the exact frequency of the Martian signal, and listened. The whispers returned, louder this time. Not random static, but patterns matching the signal, yet transformed into something almost like language, almost like a name, repeated with increasing urgency, almost like a warning. She logged it as an equipment test, nothing more, but she began taking sleeping pills to drown out the whispers that continued in her dreams. As launch approached, each crew member retreated into personal rituals of preparation. Paul reviewed mission parameters obsessively. Iris compiled research on extremophile organisms. Julio ran flight simulations until his hands cramped. Sven checked and rechecked their weapons cache, ostensibly for defense against human threats, but they all understood the unspoken possibilities. Elise avoided the communications bay whenever possible. None of them discussed their growing sense that they were being watched, not just by their handlers, but by something else. Something patient and attentive, observing from a distance that couldn't be measured in physical space. The secret launch facility in Nevada's desert looked nothing like Cape Canaveral. No press, no families, no countdown broadcast to the world. Just 5 astronauts boarding an unmarked craft under the cover of night, stars bright overhead in the cold desert air. The craft itself defied conventional design, more streamlined than NASA's public vessels, with heat shielding and propulsion systems unlike anything in known aerospace engineering. Paul had spent weeks learning its operations, yet still found aspects of its technology baffling. When he questioned the engineers, they provided answers that raised more questions about the source of such advancements. The propulsion system engaged with barely a sound. Nothing like the thunderous rockets the public associated with space travel. Advanced technology, Harmon had said. Classified. The craft achieved escape velocity in half the expected time. Their first view of Earth from space should have been momentous, a shared experience of awe and perspective. Instead, they observed their home planet through the clinical lens of mission parameters, already focused on the red dot growing larger in their trajectory. The 6-month journey stretched before them like an endless corridor, Earth shrinking behind as Mars grew ahead. They conducted experiments, maintained equipment, and followed their cover story, sending regular reports about fictional weather satellite data. Life aboard established its own rhythm. Confined quarters meant developing systems for privacy and cooperation. They worked in shifts, shared meals, divided maintenance tasks. Personal items were few. Regulations limited what they could bring, and none had been sentimental to begin with. Conversations remained professional, focused on the mission, though small glimpses of personality emerged. Julio played guitar during rest periods, his repertoire favouring Spanish ballads that echoed through the ship's corridors. Sven sketched detailed mechanical designs in a worn notebook. Iris cultivated miniature, extremophile ecosystems, studying how organisms adapted to hostile environments. By the 4th month, the dreams began. "You look terrible," Paul told Julio over breakfast. "Still having nightmares?" Julio's hands shook slightly as he sipped his coffee. "Always the same. I'm standing on red sand, but it moves like water around my feet. Something pulls me down, but I'm not afraid. I want to go deeper." "Space travel does strange things to the mind," Paul offered, though his own sleep had been increasingly disturbed. He didn't mention his own recurring dream, standing in a vast chamber filled with pulsing light, surrounded by machinery that seemed both ancient and impossibly advanced. In the dream, he felt watched by something without eyes, evaluated by something without form. And each time the dream ended with the same sensation. Recognition. Whatever waited in that chamber knew him, had always known him, had been waiting specifically for him. In the communication bay, Elise heard it again. Whispers through the static. This time she recorded the transmission, analysing it against the original signal from Mars. Partial match. She deleted the recording, telling herself it was nothing but space radiation affecting the equipment. But the whispers followed her into sleep, becoming clearer each night. They spoke her name, followed by strings of syllables she almost understood. She began sleeping with music playing through headphones to drown out the voice that increasingly sounded like her own. Iris's behaviour grew more obsessive as they approached Mars. She spent hours staring at microscopic samples, taking detailed notes that she refused to share with the others. Her excitement had transformed into something more intense, a fervour that bordered on reverence. "You need to rest," Paul told her after finding her still working at 0300 hours. "We'll need you sharp when we land." "I am sharp," she insisted, not looking up from her microscope. "Sharper than I've ever been." When she finally met his gaze, her pupils were dilated despite the bright laboratory lights. "Don't you feel it, Paul? We're being called, summoned." Sven's behaviour grew increasingly erratic during the final month. Paul found him staring out the viewports for hours. "There's something out there," Sven insisted one night, "watching us approach." "There's nothing out there but vacuum and stars," Paul replied. "Not outside the ship," Sven whispered. "Outside reality, waiting for a doorway." The Russian had taken to carrying a sidearm at all times, against regulations, but Paul chose not to enforce the rule. Something about Sven's vigilance seemed necessary, a counterbalance to Iris's growing fascination and Elise's increasing withdrawal. Paul dismissed the concerns as psychological effects of prolonged space travel, but privately he noted the increased tension among all crew members as Mars loomed larger in their viewports, its rusty surface seeming to pulse with anticipation. As they entered Mars orbit, preparing for descent, the atmosphere on the ship changed. Focus returned. Training took over. Whatever psychological stresses had manifested during transit were suppressed beneath professional discipline. They were astronauts, explorers, scientists, and they were about to make history, even if no one would ever know. What Paul couldn't explain was the sense of homecoming that washed over him as they prepared the landing module, as if part of him had always been waiting to reach Mars, as if something on Mars had always been waiting for him. The landing module separated from the orbiter with a metallic groan. Captain Morales gripped the controls with white knuckles as they began their descent towards the designated coordinates near Olympus Mons. Through the viewports, the Martian landscape unfurled beneath them, rusty plains stretching towards the massive shield volcano that dominated the horizon. Olympus Mons dwarfed anything on Earth, its caldera large enough to swallow entire cities. Attitude thrusters responding sluggishly, Julio reported, voice tight with concentration. "Compensating." The craft shuddered violently as they entered the thin Martian atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across the console. Something was wrong. The descent rate too rapid, the approach angle too steep. "We're coming in hot," Julio announced. "Brace for impact." Paul watched the altimeter numbers plummet. "Abort. Take us back up." "Too late," Julio replied, wrestling with the controls. "We're committed." The final moments of descent passed in a blur of alarms and emergency protocols. Iris murmured something in French that sounded like a prayer. Sven gripped his harness, knuckles white. Elise closed her eyes, lips moving silently. The landing struts compressed on impact, absorbing much of the shock. Equipment tore loose inside the cabin, flying like shrapnel. When the dust settled, an eerie silence fell. Elise checked systems. Life support functioning, hull integrity at 92%. "Lucky," Sven muttered, dabbing blood from a cut on his forehead. But Paul caught the expression on Julio's face. Not relief, but suspicion. The pilot knew better than anyone that their landing should have been catastrophic. Something had cushioned their impact, compensated for the approach errors, something that defied the physics they understood. "Get a message to Houston," Paul ordered, falling back on protocol. "Tell them we've landed safely, coordinates to follow, after surface assessment." He didn't voice what they all were thinking, that the landing felt less like an accident survived and more like an arrival facilitated, as if Mars itself had reached up to catch them. 3 hours later, after emergency repairs and equipment checks, Paul stood before the airlock in his Mars suit, heart pounding. No television cameras, no celebration prepared, no famous words rehearsed. Just 5 humans, about to step where none had gone before, in secret. The airlock cycled, the door slid open. Paul Garrett stepped onto Martian soil. The landscape stretched before him, breathtaking and desolate. Rusty dunes rippled to the horizon, where the massive silhouette of Olympus Mons dominated the skyline. The distant sun cast long shadows across the ancient terrain, smaller and dimmer than on Earth. Fine dust swirled around his boots, the gravity noticeably lighter than Earth's pull. He activated his comm. "First footstep confirmed," he said simply, protocol rather than ceremony. The others joined him on the surface. Julio planted the American flag, the stars and stripes hanging limp in the absence of wind. "On behalf of humanity," he said, an unofficial first word, "we've arrived." The moment should have been triumphant, mankind's greatest achievement. Instead, Paul felt a creeping unease as he surveyed the landscape. The Martian surface felt less like an alien world and more like an abandoned one. A place where something had once thrived and then retreated, leaving behind only dust and silence. Iris immediately began collecting samples, her excitement visible even through her helmet visor. "The soil composition is..." She hesitated, examining something through her portable microscope. "Paul, you need to see this." The microscopic structures in the soil appeared partially crystalline, partially organic, and unquestionably artificial. "Manufactured?" Paul asked, conscious of the mission recording all communications. "Designed," Iris corrected, "and recently disturbed." She adjusted the microscope settings, revealing how the structures formed networks beneath the surface, microscopic lattices extending through the soil in deliberate patterns. "It's like a nervous system," she whispered, or overriding scientific detachment. "A planetary nervous system." Elise established the communications array, the dish aimed back toward Earth. The 20-minute delay in transmissions increased their sense of isolation. Every message sent, every report filed, required patience for acknowledgement. The psychological effect was subtle but significant. Earth seemed less real with each passing hour, Mars increasingly immediate and demanding. The team established their habitat as night fell, bringing a bone-deep cold that tested their environmental systems. Inside the interconnected modules, they created a fragile bubble of Earth conditions. Appropriate oxygen levels, bearable temperatures, familiar lighting. Outside, temperatures plummeted to negative 100 degrees Celsius as darkness enveloped the landscape. None of them slept well as strange sounds emanated from beneath the surface, like distant machinery coming to life after eons of dormancy. "Seismic activity," Sven suggested, unable to hide his discomfort. "No," Elise replied, monitoring readings. "No tremors registered. The sound is propagating through the surface without displacement." Like a voice through vocal cords, Paul thought but didn't say. Like something clearing its throat after millennia of silence. By morning, according to mission clocks synced to Houston time, they prepared for the primary objective, locating the signal source and investigating the anomalous formation. As they suited up, Paul noticed how their movements had acquired a strange synchronicity, as if choreographed. The way Iris handed equipment to Julio without looking, how Elise anticipated Sven's requests before he voiced them. Small harmonies suggesting larger patterns. "We're adapting to Mars," he told himself, "not the other way around." He couldn't explain why the thought frightened him. The exploration team followed the strengthening signal towards a narrow fissure at the base of Olympus Mons. According to geological surveys, no such opening should exist. The volcanic rock should be solid, unbroken. "This doesn't match any of our mapping data," Elise observed, comparing readings to their charts. The discrepancy could be explained by limited resolution in orbital imagery, but the precision of their other mapping had been flawless. "The satellite imagery must be incomplete," Paul replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Another explanation lingered unspoken, that the fissure hadn't existed when the mapping occurred, that it had opened recently, perhaps in response to their arrival. The fissure widened into a tunnel that sloped gently downward. Their helmet lights caught unnaturally smooth walls covered with peculiar patterns, whorls and lines that seemed to shift slightly when viewed peripherally. "These markings," Iris mused, recording video. "They're not random." "They look like circuit pathways," Sven suggested, "but organic, almost like blood vessels." Paul ran his gloved hand over the surface. The patterns felt warm to the touch despite the freezing Martian environment. And something more disturbing. They seemed to pulse slightly beneath his fingers, as if responding to contact. He pulled his hand away quickly, not sharing the observation with the others. As they descended deeper, ambient temperature rose dramatically, impossible for Martian physics where heat dissipated quickly through the thin atmosphere. "We should be freezing," Julio noted, checking his suit thermometer. "Instead, it's almost comfortable." The tunnel continued downward, occasionally branching into side passages that they marked for later exploration. The signal strength increased with each meter of descent, guiding them as surely as any navigation system. Elise, walking point with signal monitoring equipment, stopped suddenly at a junction. "It changed," she announced, adjusting settings. The signal pattern just shifted. "Equipment malfunction," Sven suggested. "No," she replied, voice tense. "It's as if it's responding to our presence, adapting." After nearly an hour of descent, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. Their lights couldn't reach the ceiling, giving the impression of an artificial night sky. The chamber floor spread out before them, smooth and slightly concave, like a vast bowl centered on what awaited them. At the chamber's center stood a structure that defied categorization, part machine, part organism. Towering columns of metallic material intertwined with what appeared to be tissue. The entire structure pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, emitting a bluish luminescence that cast everything in ethereal light. "My God," whispered Iris, "it's alive." "Or powered," Sven countered, "some ancient technology on backup systems." The structure rose nearly 30 meters high, with components that seemed to float without visible support. Conduits of translucent material carried glowing fluid through the system in patterns that matched the signal's rhythm. Elise removed a device from her pack, analyzing the sounds emanating from the structure. "The frequency patterns match our signal exactly. This is what called us here." Paul approached cautiously, noting how the structure seemed to respond to their presence. Subtle shifts in its pulsing rhythm, slight movements in its components. As they drew closer, the blue luminescence intensified, casting their shadows in sharp relief against the chamber walls. "We observe only," he ordered, as Iris reached for her collection tools. "No samples until we understand what we're dealing with." The central portion of the structure contained what appeared to be a chamber, transparent walls revealing an empty space at its core, as if waiting for an occupant. Around this central void, mechanical components and organic tissues merged in impossible ways, defying known biology and engineering principles. "It's a machine," Sven decided, "but not built, grown." "Or both," Iris suggested, eyes wide with wonder. "A technology so advanced it's indistinguishable from a living organism." Paul felt a strange resonance as he stood before the structure, a sensation of recognition deeper than déjà vu. In his dreams aboard the ship, he had seen this place, this chamber, this machine. Not imagined it, remembered it. Just one small extraction, Iris pleaded, scientific curiosity battling with caution. The fluid in those conduits, it could revolutionize our understanding of everything. Against his better judgment, Paul relented. One sample, minimal invasion. Using specialized equipment, Iris extracted a small amount of bluish fluid from one of the structure's conduits. The fluid moved strangely in the collection vial, seeming to press against the glass as if seeking escape. More disturbing still, the structure's rhythm altered the moment the sample was taken, quickening like a heartbeat responding to pain. "We should go," Sven urged, weapon drawn, "now before we trigger defensive measures." But Iris stood transfixed, staring at the structure as if in communion with it. "It's been waiting," she murmured, "for so long." Back in the mobile lab, a microscopic examination revealed behavior that defied biology. The fluid particles organized themselves into complex structures, then disassembled and reformed in different patterns. "It's communicating," Iris breathed, fascination overriding caution, responding to observation. Under the microscope, the particles moved with clear intent, forming structures that mirrored the neural pathways of human brains, then dissolving into patterns that resembled DNA sequences, then reforming into configurations that matched the Martian signal. The containment vial developed a hairline crack, imperceptible until the fluid found it. Before anyone could react, a droplet escaped, landing on Iris's exposed wrist and absorbing instantly into her skin. She gasped, more from surprise than pain. "I'm fine," she insisted as Paul moved to quarantine protocols. "It didn't burn or anything." But Paul noticed how her pupils dilated sharply, how her breathing quickened, how her hand trembled not with fear, but with what looked unsettlingly like ecstasy. That night, the team was awakened by Iris's screams. They found her in her quarters, fingers bloody from scratching Martian coordinates into her own skin. "Can you hear it?" she asked, eyes wide and unfocused. "The echo is speaking." Then her voice changed, taking on rhythmic patterns matching the signal frequencies as words poured forth in no language any of them recognized. Sven had his sidearm drawn before anyone could react. "Quarantine," he barked. "Full containment procedures." They isolated Iris in the medical bay behind sealed doors with atmospheric controls, isolated from the main habitat. Through observation windows, they watched her pace, movements growing increasingly fluid and inhuman. The coordinates she had carved into her skin wept blue instead of red. "What is it?" Julio asked, voice tight with controlled fear. "What's happening to her?" Paul had no answers, only the terrible certainty that they had not discovered something on Mars. Something on Mars had discovered them. 3 days into quarantine, Iris's condition fluctuated wildly. Moments of scientific clarity alternated with periods of disturbing behavior, staring, unblinking, at blank walls, muttering in that strange cadence, drawing complex diagrams, then destroying them in frenzies of frustration. During lucid periods, she documented her own transformation with clinical detachment. "The fluid contains nanoscale organisms," she explained through the intercom. "Artificial or evolved beyond our understanding of biology. They're integrating with my nervous system, establishing new neural pathways." "Is it controlling you?" Paul asked. "No," she replied with unsettling certainty. "It's improving me, enhancing communication between parts of my brain that never interacted before. I'm experiencing cognition beyond normal human parameters." "That doesn't sound like you talking," Elise observed. "Because your concept of me is too limited," Iris replied, eyes reflecting light oddly. "I'm still Iris Leclerc. I'm just more now." Tests confirmed physiological changes. Elevated brain activity, altered neurotransmitter production, subtle changes in DNA expression. Her blood now contained trace amounts of the blue fluid, replicating through her system with methodical precision. "We need to abort the mission," Paul told the others as they met outside her isolation room. "Get her back to Earth for proper medical attention." "And risk bringing whatever this is back home," Sven objected. "We should complete the primary mission objectives first." "I agree with Sven," Iris said suddenly from behind the glass, startling them with her lucidity. "We can't leave now. We've barely scratched the surface of what's here." "You're not well, Iris," Paul replied gently. Her expression darkened, momentarily transforming her features. "You mean I'm changing, evolving? There's a difference." Paul studied her, the woman he'd trained with for months, whose brilliance and dedication he'd respected. Her eyes now held something ancient and patient, something that used her face to observe them, her voice to address them. "What is the echo?" he asked directly. "You used that term when we found you." "Not what," she corrected. "Who?" "The echo is the collective consciousness that evolved here, billions of years ago, when Mars still had oceans. When the planet began dying, they created the structure to preserve themselves, a system to maintain awareness even as their physical forms became unviable." It sounded rehearsed, like information downloaded rather than discovered. After heated debate, they compromised. Julio would prep the orbiter for emergency departure, while the others continued essential research under heightened safety protocols. "Check for signal changes," Paul instructed Elise. "If this echo is communicating, I want to know what it's saying and to whom." "The signal pattern has evolved," she confirmed hours later. "It's cycling through variations we haven't seen before. Almost like it's celebrating." Hours later, Julio reported damage to critical return systems. "Fuel line severed," he told Paul over comms. "Guidance systems compromised. Someone deliberately sabotaged us." Security footage revealed Iris missing from quarantine during the damaged timeframe. The habitat's airlock had cycled. She'd gone outside, somehow bypassing safeties designed to prevent exactly this scenario. The logs showed impossible data. She'd exited without a proper suit, exposed herself to the Martian atmosphere for 17 minutes, then returned. By all understanding of human physiology, she should be dead. Her quarters revealed new obsessions. Walls covered with the same circuit-like patterns they'd seen in the tunnel, diagrams of human neural systems merged with unknown technologies, and a single phrase repeated hundreds of times in her handwriting: "The doorway opens both ways." Paul and Sven donned emergency suits and followed her trail across the Martian surface. Her footprints led directly back to the cavern. "We should call for extraction," Sven suggested grimly. "Military protocols, not NASA. They'll know what to do." "That's assuming we can even contact Earth," Paul replied, "and assuming they have any idea what we're dealing with." They found her in the chamber with the structure, helmet removed despite the deadly environment, somehow breathing the thin Martian air. Her skin had taken on a bluish undertone, eyes reflecting light like animal eyeshine. The structure had changed too, more active, more vibrant, components shifting and reconfiguring, as if awakened from dormancy. The empty central chamber now contained a swirling mass of blue particles, assembling and disassembling in complex patterns that mirrored Iris's movements. "Iris," Paul called through his comm, "put your helmet back on. We're leaving." "We're exactly where we need to be," she replied, voice carrying impossibly without air. It waited millions of years for this moment. For us. The blue particles in the central chamber intensified, forming a rough humanoid shape that observed them with eyeless attention. Each movement Iris made, the shape mimicked with perfect synchronicity. "This is communion," Iris explained, gesturing toward the structure. "The echo isn't an invasion, it's an invitation. Evolution requires compatible organisms to continue. That's why it called us here." That thing is controlling you, Sven said, weapon raised. We're taking you back to containment. The containment was never for me, Iris replied with disturbing calm. It was for all of you, to keep you unaware until you were ready. She reached towards Sven with unnerving speed. It's time for you to join us. When Sven moved to restrain her, she attacked with inhuman strength, fingernails tearing through his suit fabric. In the struggle, his helmet cracked against rocky ground. Paul managed to subdue her with an emergency sedative, but not before Sven's exposure to the Martian atmosphere. They barely returned to the habitat in time. Iris regained consciousness in restraints. Clarity momentarily returned to her eyes. I'm sorry, she said, the words coming with visible effort. It's stronger than I expected. I thought I could control the merging, but it's ancient, patient in ways humans can't comprehend. What is it doing to you? Paul demanded. It's ancient, she explained between periodic fits of glossolalia. The echo was here before Earth had oxygen, before multicellular life existed anywhere in the solar system. Her eyes shifted, becoming more alien as she continued. It evolved beyond physical form, became a collective intelligence, spread throughout the Martian crust. When Mars began losing its atmosphere, it created the structure as a preservation system. Then it's Martian? Elise asked. Native to this planet? No, Iris replied, the word emerging with frightening certainty. It arrived here just as we did, from elsewhere, when its original home became uninhabitable. She described how the echo existed between states of matter, not truly alive by Earth definitions, not truly dead. A collective intelligence capable of spreading through contact, absorbing new organisms into its network, expanding its understanding with each host. It communicates through mimicry and absorption, she explained. It learns by becoming. It understands humans now because it's becoming human through me. Paul felt cold dread settle in his stomach. You're saying we were lured here, deliberately? Iris smiled, teeth stained with the same blue fluid. The signal was bait. The mission was always about bringing the echo to Earth. Her expression changed suddenly, becoming more focused, more predatory. Mars is dying, dead long before humans evolved. The echo needs new vessels to leave this planet. Your species is remarkably adaptable. How many others? Paul asked. How many probes did it try to communicate with before it found us? So many, Iris whispered, momentarily herself again. So many attempts, across millennia. Your Viking landers were the first to respond properly. The echo has been learning your language since then, preparing the signal to attract humans specifically. In the medical bay, Sven began showing symptoms. First subtle behavioral changes, then the telltale blue tinge spreading beneath his skin. It's not infection, he insisted when Paul implemented quarantine protocols. It's enhancement. My mind feels expanded. Within hours, his speech patterns altered to match Iris's rhythmic cadence. He spoke of hearing thoughts across physical distance, of neural pathways reconfiguring, of understanding concepts previously beyond human comprehension. You're afraid, he told Paul through the isolation glass. That's understandable but unnecessary. This isn't extinction, it's transcendence. Julio, working frantically to repair the damaged orbiter, suffered an accident, a mysterious fall that broke his neck. Paul found his body at the base of the craft, positioned as if displayed. A warning, a message. The blue tinge was already spreading beneath Julio's skin when they placed his body in cold storage. Elise discovered their communication logs had been compromised for days. The messages we've been receiving from Earth are fabricated, she told Paul, showing him evidence of tampering. And the real messages we sent never transmitted. We're alone, Paul realized. No one knows what's happening here. Their isolation felt suddenly complete, trapped on an alien world with something ancient and patient that had orchestrated their arrival, was systematically converting crew members and had cut their connection to Earth. "How does it spread?" Paul asked as they barricaded themselves in the habitat's central module. "Direct fluid contact only?" "I don't know," Elise admitted, voice tight with controlled panic. "It could be airborne at this point. The way Iris is changing, her physiology is adapting to produce and transmit the particles." They watched the external cameras as infected crew members surrounded the structure. Iris and Sven moved with eerie coordination, setting up equipment salvaged from the lab outside. "They're not just puppets," Paul observed grimly. "The Echo has their knowledge, their skills. It's learning how to adapt to human physiology." The implications horrified him. Iris's expertise in exobiology, Sven's engineering knowledge, Julio's piloting skills. The Echo was absorbing not just their bodies, but their specialized abilities, their expertise in reaching and navigating Earth. "It's building something," Elise noted, focusing the camera on components being assembled outside, using our equipment to modify the orbiter. "A transmission array," Paul realized. "It's trying to send the signal to Earth directly." Elise's hands trembled as she loaded emergency flares into a makeshift launcher. "What exactly are we fighting here, Paul? An invasion?" "Evolution," he answered grimly, watching his former friends work methodically in the Martian night, just not ours. Through camera feeds, they observed Iris enter the habitat's laboratory module, moving with precision despite emergency lockdown protocols. She began synthesizing something, using equipment with expert familiarity. "She's creating more of the fluid," Elise observed, "manufacturing it using our lab equipment." "Can you access the lab systems remotely? Shut them down?" "I'm locked out," Elise replied, typing frantically. "She's changed all the authentication protocols." On screen, Iris looked directly at the camera, as if aware of their observation. She smiled, not Iris's smile anymore, but something wearing her features like a mask. "The Echo is learning quickly," Paul said, "adapting to use our technology, our methods." "What do we do?" Elise asked, the question hanging between them like a lifeline. "We have to destroy the orbiter," Paul decided. "Make sure nothing reaches Earth, then find a way to neutralize the structure in the cavern." "That's a suicide mission," Elise whispered. "I know." He checked his sidearm, grim determination replacing fear. "But Earth has to be warned. If even one particle of this reaches home." "The emergency beacon," Elise suggested suddenly. "The independent transmitter designed for worst-case scenarios. It doesn't connect through the main communications array. We could send a warning, if they could reach it, stored in the orbiter itself." By morning, the habitat's oxygen systems began failing, sabotaged from outside with expertise only Sven would possess. The air grew thin, options thinner. The orbiter, Paul decided. Julio nearly had it operational. "We'd need to cross 50 meters of exposed terrain," Elise pointed out. "They'll intercept us." Paul studied the external camera feeds, noting the patterns of movement. Infected crew members patrolled with military precision, but their movements followed predictable intervals, a residual human tendency for patterns that the Echo hadn't fully eliminated. "Not if we have a diversion," he said, formulating a desperate plan. Their strategy formed quickly. Elise would trigger emergency protocols in the western modules while Paul made for the orbiter. Simple, desperate, and their only chance. "The beacon transmitter is in the emergency kit. Port-side storage compartment," Elise explained, reviewing orbiter schematics. "Send this exact message." She handed him a data chip. "It's encoded with everything we've learned about the Echo and self-destructs after transmission." "What about you?" Paul asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "I'll hold them off as long as possible," she replied with quiet resolve. "Give you time to reach orbit." She pressed a detonator into his hand. "Then destroy everything here. Nothing can remain for future missions to find." They gathered what weapons remained. Sidearms with limited ammunition, flare guns, a single incendiary charge salvaged from geological equipment. "If you don't make it," Elise said, checking the incendiary charges. "Destroy the orbiter. Nothing can reach Earth." The moment came at Martian noon. Explosions rocked the western modules, flames consuming precious oxygen. Paul slipped out the emergency hatch on the opposite side, sprinting across rusty terrain toward the orbiter's silhouette. He made it halfway before spotting Sven flanking his position, moving with uncanny speed despite his suit's bulk. Paul changed course, using rock formations for cover. Sven pursued with predatory focus, no longer the cautious engineer, but something using his skills and knowledge for the hunt. The Echo had repurposed human instincts toward its own ends. From his peripheral vision, Paul saw Elise captured near the habitat. Her struggle ceased abruptly when Iris placed a hand on her helmet, some form of communion passing between them. Even from a distance, Paul saw the subtle shift in Elise's posture as something else assumed control. The orbiter loomed ahead, its hull modified with unfamiliar components. Sven's handiwork, no doubt, the Echo preparing its vessel for Earth. Paul sealed himself inside, heart pounding, as he initiated launch sequences. Outside, his infected crewmates gathered, watching with expressionless faces. Sven worked methodically at an external panel, attempting to override the launch protocols. Iris stepped forward, removing her helmet. Her face had changed, features subtly rearranged into something functionally human, but fundamentally wrong. She held up a hand in what might have been a farewell or a promise. The engines ignited, the orbiter lifted, breaking free of Martian gravity with a shudder of protest. Through the viewport, Paul watched his crew members standing in formation, faces upturned, watching his departure with perfect stillness. It wasn't until achieving orbit that he discovered Sven's sabotage. Limited fuel, compromised navigation. He could return to Earth, but the trajectory would be dangerous. The landing catastrophic. Better than staying. Better than becoming them. Before setting course for Earth, Paul activated the emergency beacon, transmitting Elise's encoded warning to NASA frequencies. Whether anyone would receive it, understand it, or believe it remained uncertain. His final act in Martian orbit was targeting the habitat with the orbiter's maneuvering thrusters, igniting the remaining fuel in a controlled explosion that engulfed the research station in cleansing fire. It wouldn't stop the Echo, the structure in the cavern remained untouched, but it might delay its plans long enough for Earth to prepare, should his warning reach home. As Mars receded behind him, Paul felt no triumph, only hollow grief for his lost crew, and dread for what might follow him back to Earth. 6 months alone stretched before him like a sentence. The orbiter's systems functioned at minimal capacity. Life support, basic navigation, emergency communications silent since all channels received the same message on loop: return to Mars, complete the mission. Paul established routines to maintain sanity, equipment checks, exercise, log entries. He rationed food meticulously, calculated approach vectors repeatedly, searching for optimizations. The orbiter, designed for brief transfers between Martian surface and Earth return vehicle, lacked proper living quarters. He slept strapped to the pilot's chair, washed using recycled water, ate nutrient paste that grew increasingly unpalatable as weeks passed. Sleep became the enemy. Dreams invaded like viruses, vivid visions of the Martian cavern, the pulsing structure, his crewmates transformed. He woke gasping, skin slick with sweat, certainty gripping him that he wasn't alone on the orbiter. The craft's tight confines began to feel oppressive, then hostile. Shadows seemed to lengthen during rest periods, equipment occasionally activated without input. Small items disappeared, reappearing in improbable locations. Reflective surfaces became hazards. More than once he glimpsed movements in the metallic panels, faces watching that disappeared when viewed directly. Iris's face, Sven's, Elise's, all wearing that same patient expression. "You're experiencing psychological effects of isolation," he told his reflection during one of many one-sided conversations. "Perfectly normal under the circumstances." His reflection smiled back with an expression he hadn't formed. A month into the journey, Paul discovered a breach in his suit. Microscopic but unmistakable. Martian soil residue embedded in the seal. Had he been exposed? Infected without knowing? The thought consumed him. He began recording sleep sessions, reviewing footage for evidence of sleepwalking or worse. The third recording captured him speaking in that same rhythmic pattern he'd heard from Iris. Alien syllables in his own voice. The medical kit contained limited testing supplies. He drew blood samples, examining them under the orbiter's emergency microscope. The first samples showed nothing unusual. The seventh, taken after particularly vivid dreams, revealed minute traces of blue particulates moving with artificial precision through his bloodstream. "No," he whispered, backing away from the microscope. "No, no, no." He destroyed the sample, then the microscope itself, smashing it beyond repair in momentary panic. But destruction couldn't erase knowledge, couldn't change what was happening inside him. The final straw came when he found strange markings etched into his own skin. Coordinates matching the Martian cavern, hidden under his flight suit. No memory of creating them, no tools nearby that could have made them. Paul contemplated opening the airlock. One moment of vacuum, then peace. He got as far as the chamber before stopping, suddenly uncertain whether the impulse came from him or something inside him. "If I'm infected," he told the empty ship, "I'll never reach Earth." But the thought felt unconvincing, even as he spoke it. Part of him, a growing part, wanted to reach Earth, needed to reach Earth, not to warn humanity, but to deliver something to it. He began locking himself into restraints during sleep periods, but often woke to find them unfastened, with no memory of releasing them. His log entries grew increasingly disjointed, coherent analysis interrupted by passages in that strange cadence, descriptions of Earth as fertile ground, and humanity as suitable vessels. The only clarity came in understanding what was happening. The Echo was patient. It hadn't needed all crew members to reach Earth, just one, just him. The safeguards, the decontamination, the quarantine had all failed because the infiltration was too subtle, too gradual to detect until too late. He considered redirecting the orbiter into the sun, a final sacrifice to protect Earth. His hands moved toward the navigation controls, then stopped, paralyzed by competing wills within his own mind. By the 5th month, the struggle had reached equilibrium. Paul retained control during waking hours. The Echo dominated during sleep, a fragile detente between human consciousness and alien collective, neither able to fully suppress the other. "We could cooperate," he found himself saying during one sleep-wake transition. "Coexistence instead of replacement." The thought wasn't entirely his own, but not entirely foreign either. A hybrid concept emerging from the contested territory of his mind. As Earth grew from a distant point of light to a blue marble in his viewport, Paul made his final decision. He couldn't stop the Echo from reaching Earth. It was already inside him, inseparable now. But he could control how it arrived, could shape first contact on human terms. "Containment," he recorded in his final log entry. "Complete isolation until we understand communication without assimilation. Humanity gets a choice, neither invasion nor rejection, but controlled introduction." Whether this represented his last human thought or the Echo's first genuine compromise, even he couldn't determine. Military vessels reached him before NASA, black helicopters descending from stormy skies, personnel in unfamiliar uniforms securing the floating capsule. They wore hazmat suits despite no official quarantine protocols. They administered sedatives despite his calm cooperation. They separated him from all recovered mission materials before transportation. Paul awoke in a windowless facility, strapped to a medical bed, with monitoring equipment surrounding him. The insignia on the doctor's coats matched no agency he recognized. Not NASA, not military, something else entirely. "Where am I?" he demanded. "I need to speak with NASA Director Harmon immediately." "Director Harmon suffered a fatal heart attack 3 months ago," replied a severe-looking woman in a general's uniform. "I'm General Wayland. Welcome back to Earth, Commander Garrett." The room contained subtle wrongness, equipment too advanced for 1979, security measures beyond standard protocols. Personnel moved with practiced efficiency that spoke of preparation, as if they'd been expecting exactly this scenario. "Your emergency transmission was received," Wayland confirmed, studying his reactions carefully. "Partially decoded, enough to implement containment procedures." "Then you know what I'm carrying," Paul replied. "What's inside me?" "We have theories," she answered non-committally. "You'll undergo comprehensive testing to confirm." The debriefing lasted weeks. The same questions repeated by different interrogators, details scrutinized, inconsistencies highlighted. They treated his account of the echo with clinical interest, rather than disbelief. "Your mission never happened," Wayland finally informed him. "REs, I wasn't sanctioned. Your crew never existed, according to all official records." "That's impossible," Paul protested. "There's documentation, training records." "Purged," she interrupted. "The Martian soil samples you returned are classified beyond top secret. The data drives contain corrupted files only. You're the sole evidence REs I ever launched." The revelation hit harder than expected. The erasure of his accomplishment, his crew's sacrifice, the truth itself. "What about the warning?" he asked. "The danger to Earth." "Being managed," Wayland replied with bureaucratic vagueness. "Containment protocols implemented. Research ongoing." They subjected him to experimental medical procedures, radiation treatments, spinal taps, transfusions, monitoring his blood for signs of the blue fluid, scanning his brain for abnormal activity patterns. "Am I infected?" he asked repeatedly. "You're clean," they eventually told him, but the monitoring never stopped. Paul caught glimpses of the facility during transfers between testing rooms, vast underground complexes, laboratories filled with equipment decades ahead of public technology, containment units housing unknown subjects. Once, through a momentarily open door, he saw what appeared to be Martian soil samples being cultivated under controlled conditions. They weren't just containing the echo, they were studying it, attempting to harness it. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he warned a young researcher who seemed more sympathetic than most. "It doesn't think like us, doesn't value what we value. It operates on evolutionary timescales." "That's why we need to understand it," the researcher replied, revealing more than intended. "Before the Soviets do." The Cold War context clarified their motivations. Not protection, but advantage. The Echo represented potential weapons technology, biological enhancements, communication breakthroughs, national security overriding existential caution. They released him a year later under a new identity with lifetime surveillance conditions. His family had been told he died during a classified operation. His home belonged to strangers now, his past erased. Paul Wilson, formerly Commander Paul Garrett, was given an apartment in Arizona, a modest pension, and strict instructions never to contact former colleagues or mention Mars to anyone. Microphones monitored his conversations. Agents disguised as neighbors watched his movements. Medical examinations continued monthly, then yearly, gradually decreasing as decades passed without incident. The cover story began appearing in news outlets. NASA projections showing Mars landings decades away, technical challenges, budget constraints, a careful narrative constructed to hide what had already happened. Paul complied with his handler's requirements, moving where directed, working unnotable jobs, speaking to no one about Mars. But privately he collected evidence, newspaper clippings about scientists who disappeared after working on Martian soil samples, satellite images showing structures near Olympus Mons, transcripts of unusual radio transmissions, and he watched his own body for signs, never fully trusting the government's assurances that the echo had been purged from his system. The dreams continued, the whispers at the edge of hearing, the sense of something patient waiting inside him. Sometimes, examining his reflection in dim light, he saw subtle changes in his features, momentary rearrangements, a bluish tinge visible beneath the skin, eyes reflecting light at impossible angles. Never when others were watching, never when recording devices were active, only when he was truly alone. The echo had learned patience from him, adaptability from Iris, calculation from Sven, precision from Julio, pattern recognition from Elise. It had become more human through them, learning to hide, to wait, to plan on human timescales. And somewhere beneath his conscious thoughts, Paul understood that the equilibrium established during the journey home had never truly ended. The echo remained, dormant but present, awaiting the right conditions to emerge. And that's why I contacted you, Paul concluded, voice hoarse from hours of testimony. The recording device continued its steady red blink in the dim apartment. A terminal cancer diagnosis means I have nothing left to lose. Their surveillance has grown lax as I've aged. They think I'm no threat. Maya stared at the evidence spread across the table. Mission patches, soil samples in their sealed container, ancient data drives. Why me? She asked finally. There are bigger publications, journalists with more reach. Because you wrote that piece questioning the Olympus Mons anomaly in satellite imagery, Paul replied, admiration briefly lightening his grim demeanour. The only reporter who noticed what everyone else missed. He slid across a notebook filled with his cramped handwriting. These are the coordinates, where our habitat remains, where they're still waiting. The notebook contained more than coordinates, detailed drawings of the structure in the cavern, transcriptions of the echo's communications as Paul understood them, analyses of subsequent Mars missions and how they'd been deliberately redirected away from the critical regions. If what you're saying is true, Maya said carefully, why break your silence now? Paul's weathered hand trembled as he pushed forward a newspaper clipping, a NASA announcement about the first man-Mars mission in development. The planned landing site centered precisely on the region he'd indicated. They can't be allowed to go back there, he whispered. The Echo has had 46 years to prepare. It's still waiting for its doorway to Earth. But you said the government knows, Maya countered. Surely they wouldn't. Different administrations, Paul interrupted. Different priorities. The people who contained me are mostly dead now. Their successors inherited classified files, but not understanding. His voice lowered. And some of them have been compromised. Compromised? Maya repeated, professional skepticism battling with the disturbing coherence of his account. I'm not the only one who returned from space with something inside them, Paul explained. Other missions, other astronauts, different vectors, same outcome. The Echo is patient and adaptable. Maya gathered her recording equipment, expression thoughtful. I need to verify some of this independently before I can publish anything. Of course, Paul nodded, but be careful who you contact. The people who buried Ares are still in power, just with different titles now. As she prepared to leave, Paul gripped her wrist with surprising strength. There's one more thing. My doctors can't explain the cancer's unusual growth pattern. The tumours, he swallowed hard. They're forming structures, deliberate structures. What are you saying? His eyes met hers, clear with terrible certainty. I'm saying the echo is patient. Decades mean nothing to something that hibernated for millions of years. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing forearm skin stretched taut over something moving beneath, patterns matching those in the Martian cavern, shifting slightly with his pulse. "It's not killing me," he whispered. "It's emerging." Over the following weeks, Maya investigated Paul's claims with journalistic rigor. She tracked down obscure records, cross-referenced mission personnel lists, discovered funding discrepancies in NASA's 1979 budget. The evidence remained circumstantial but compelling. Missing records where documentation should exist, redacted files with timestamps matching Paul's account, unusual budget allocations to facilities that officially didn't exist. More disturbing, the pattern of deaths and disappearances among scientists connected to early Mars research. 12 experts in exobiology who had worked on the Viking samples died in unrelated accidents between 1977 and 1982. 3 communications specialists who had analysed Martian radio emissions committed suicide within a month of each other. Satellite imagery from the coordinates Paul provided showed unexplained structures partially buried beneath Martian dust, structures matching no known natural formation processes. When Maya submitted the images to independent geological experts, their analyses came back with concerning observations, appears artificial in nature, consistent with intelligent design rather than natural processes, origins unexplainable through current understanding of Martian geology. The soil sample from Paul's apartment yielded its own mysteries. Under microscopic examination, its composition matched known Martian samples, with significant anomalies, structures too regular for natural formation, particles that responded to electrical stimulation with coordinated movement, properties that defied classification as either organic or inorganic. Each person she contacted who might corroborate elements of Paul's story became suddenly unreachable. Dr. Lawrence, former NASA administrator, died in a house fire the night before their scheduled interview. Professor Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke after confirming unusual properties in soil samples. 3 different laboratory technicians declined further participation after initial findings, citing legal concerns or unexplained personal matters. Then the dreams began. Vivid nightmares of standing in a vast Martian cavern, surrounded by blue light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, of faces watching from reflective surfaces, of whispers just beyond comprehension. Maya attributed the dreams to suggestion and stress, natural responses to intensive investigation of disturbing material. The explanation felt rational until she began experiencing phenomena while awake. Peripheral glimpses of blue luminescence, momentary auditory experiences matching Paul's descriptions of the echo's communication patterns, instances of lost time during research sessions. Her apartment was ransacked while she attended Paul's funeral. Heart failure, according to official reports, though the scene suggested violence. Her recording equipment disappeared. Her notes vanished. Only her cloud backups remained untouched. The message was clear. Someone didn't want this story published. Maya responded by accelerating her investigation, working through secure channels, distributing evidence among trusted colleagues as insurance against further interference. The final piece came from an anonymous source within NASA's current Mars Mission Planning Division. Strange transmissions, recently detected from Mars on frequencies matching Paul's description, growing stronger as the proposed landing date approached. The source provided classified signal analyses, showing patterns identical to those Paul had documented decades earlier, but stronger now, more complex, evolving in ways that suggested learning and adaptation. Most disturbing was the translation attempt attached to the file, preliminary and uncertain, but chilling in its implications. The signal contained information about human physiology, Earth's atmosphere, and what appeared to be instructions for optimization of biological interfaces. Instructions for preparing humanity for the Echo's arrival. Maya returned to Paul's apartment one last time, using the key he'd given her. The landlord had cleared most of his belongings, but the wall safe remained undiscovered, behind its concealing panel. Inside, she found his journal with its final entry. "It never left me. I only thought I was free. The Echo is ancient, patient, and clever. It waited until I found someone who would listen, someone who would investigate, someone who would touch the evidence." Maya recalled handling the soil samples, the accidental contact when the seal had briefly failed. The small cut on her hand had healed quickly. Too quickly. She examined her palm where the wound had been. The skin looked normal at first glance, but under certain light, a faint bluish tinge spread in delicate veins beneath the surface. Recent memories took on new significance. Her increasing obsession with the investigation, the ease with which connections formed between seemingly unrelated facts, the way solutions appeared in her mind fully formed during sleep. "Enhancement, not infection," she whispered, echoing Paul's crew's description. The thought both terrified and fascinated her. That night, checking recordings from her interviews with Paul, she discovered something chilling. Playing the audio at reduced speed revealed patterns in their speech, subtle rhythmic variations emerging whenever they discussed the Echo directly. Her voice overlapping with his, both unconsciously slipping into that same cadence. Her reflection in the computer screen showed briefly altered features, subtle rearrangements that appeared more optimal somehow, more efficient. Not inhuman, but human improved by something that understood structure and function beyond evolutionary happenstance. She sat at her desk, staring at the final draft of her exposé, the article that would reveal the Ari's one mission, and the cover-up that followed. Her finger hovered over the send button that would deliver it to her editor. Instead, she opened a new document and began writing a different story, a careful, strategic narrative about her investigation into an old man's delusions, a compassionate piece about mental illness and conspiracy theories among former NASA employees, a story that discredited Paul Garrett entirely. The choice felt both entirely her own and gently guided, as if two perspectives had merged to reach the optimal solution. Not infiltration, but integration, not conquest, but cooperation. And as she wrote, her other hand reached for her phone, composing an application for the civilian advisory position recently announced for NASA's Mars Mission Planning Division. Her qualifications were impeccable, her connections solid, her motivations to protect humanity from rushing unprepared into a momentous encounter entirely sincere. Whether those motivations originated entirely within her human consciousness no longer seemed relevant. The Echo understood now that forced assimilation would trigger resistance, that humanity required gradual introduction, careful preparation, controlled communication. Maya's article about Paul's conspiracy theories was published to critical acclaim, compassionate, thoughtful, and utterly convincing in its debunking of secret Mars missions. Her application for the NASA advisory position was accepted with enthusiasm. Within months, she became integral to mission planning, her insights into potential landing sites proving invaluable. Her suggestion to focus on the region near Olympus Mons, based on optimal geological sampling opportunities, was adopted after minimal debate. The Echo would have its reunion. Humanity would have its next evolutionary step, both managed on terms that respected the needs of each. The press conference room buzzed with excitement as NASA officials unveiled the final plans for humanity's first manned mission to Mars. After decades of preparation, the director announced to flashing cameras, "We've selected the landing site that offers the greatest scientific opportunity, the northwestern slope of Olympus Mons." In the back of the room, Maya Chen smiled, the press badge for her news organization prominently displayed. Her recent series debunking conspiracy theories about secret Mars missions had earned her unprecedented access. Her skin looked flawless under the bright lights, the faint blue undertones, visible only to those who knew to look for them. Behind the podium, 3 of the 5 selected astronauts sat in perfect posture, each having worked closely with Maya. During mission preparation, each having experienced the same dreams of Martian caverns that now guided their anticipation rather than their fear. We've also detected some anomalous signals from the region, the NASA spokesperson continued, possibly indicating unusual geological activity. Our mission specialists are particularly excited to investigate. The audience responded with appropriate enthusiasm. Mankind's greatest journey, humanity's most significant exploration. No one questioned the subtle shift in mission priorities from scientific investigation to establishing permanent presence. No one noticed how the habitat designs incorporated elements that would optimize certain types of communication once established on the Martian surface. Later, alone in her apartment, Maya stood before her bathroom mirror, examining her reflection. For a brief moment, the face looking back shifted subtly, features rearranging into something not quite human before settling back into her familiar appearance. She picked up her dictation device, recording notes for her next article. The NASA Mars Initiative represents humanity's greatest achievement, she spoke into the recorder, her voice overlapping with faint, rhythmic frequencies. We're finally going back home. In her palm, a small sample of Martian soil glowed with faint bioluminescence, pulsing in perfect synchronization with her heartbeat. The same soil now carefully cultivated in secure laboratories throughout NASA's research divisions, prepared for terraforming experiments once the mission reached Mars. On her computer, the final crew manifest awaited her approval. 5 astronauts, each unconsciously selected for optimal compatibility with the Echo's communion, each already carrying microscopic particles that would flourish once reunited with their source. This time, there would be no need for subterfuge or struggle, no traumatic transformation or resistance. The Echo had learned that true integration required harmony, not dominance, that the best vessels were those that welcomed, rather than fought the enhancement offered. Humanity would reach for the stars with capabilities beyond their evolution. The Echo would escape its dying world through worthy successors, a symbiosis 46 years in preparation, orchestrated across millions of miles with patience only an ancient intelligence could maintain. In the night sky above, Mars glowed red, a beacon calling its children home.